Optimal patent life, orphan drugs. We have already remarked on the fact that there is one patent term, 20 years. The analysis of this section has implied that this is not optimal. Clearly, the social costs and benefits of inventions and innovations differ, sometimes markedly. Ideally, the patent system would recognize these variations by granting different patent terms depending on the net social benefit of each invention. But the administrative costs of making an invention by invention determination of optimal patent life, or even putting inventions into classes with different patent terms, are probably prohibitively high. They are no doubt social costs, perhaps significant social costs that follow. For instance, there may be a valuable invention that is extremely costly to develop, but that simply could not generate enough revenues if sold at a reasonable cost within the 20-year patent term to justify development. The United States Congress has recognized several important examples of such inventions. One is the Hatch-Waxman Act, Drug Price Competition and Patent Restoration Act of 1984. That act added up to 5 years of patent life for pharmaceuticals to make up for lost time in the pre approval testing of new drugs required by the Food and Drug Administration. The act also eliminated duplicative safety and effectiveness testing for generic drugs, those that share the chemical composition of drugs that are coming off patent. Congress went even further in the Orphan Drug Act of 1983 and its later amendments. Congress addressed that act at an instance of the problem we mentioned above, a valuable invention that might not be developed because of the standard patent life was not long enough to justify the development costs. An orphan drug is one for treatment of any disease or condition which occurs so infrequently in the United States that there is no reasonable expectation that the cost of developing or marketing the drug will be recovered by sales. A later amendment further defined such diseases or conditions as those affecting fewer than 200,000 people in the United States. The act gives developers of orphan drugs tax credits for the costs of clinical studies and other subsidies for development costs. In addition, developers of orphan drugs are given a period of 7 year exclusivity, which may be revoked if the developer fails to provide the patient population with the drug or abandons the drug. Superscript 9, which reads: This term of exclusivity may strike some readers as odd. Aren't all patent grants of exclusivity? Yes, but there is a very important qualification. A normal patent gives the holder exclusive rights to that invention or innovation, but others are free to develop distinct but different inventions that substitute for but do not infringe upon existing patents. See our brief discussion of the doctrine of equivalence in this section. So you may have to develop and patent a pharmaceutical that lowers bad blood cholesterol, but others can develop other chemicals directed at the same end, so long as they are not close copies of your drug. Consider that your ownership of a piece of real property gives you exclusive rights to that property, but not to similarly situated pieces of property. The distinction in the Orphan Drug Act is that once one has developed a pharmaceutical that meets the criteria for being designated an orphan drug, no one else can develop even a different drug addressed to the same condition or disease for 7 years, at least under the original formulation of the Act. Returning to the text. Finally, the FDA greatly accelerates the approval process for orphan drugs, sometimes taking only 8 months for approval. The act apparently had the desired effect. In the 20 years before 1983, the FDA had approved only 10 orphan drugs, but in 1984 alone it approved 24. During the Act's first 15 years, the number of orphan drugs increased fivefold, while the number of non-orphan drugs increased by twofold. Superscript 10, which reads, see Frank Lichtenberg and Joel Waldfogel, Does Misery Love Company? Evidence from pharmaceutical markets before and after the Orphan Drug Act. NBER, working paper number 9750, open parentheses, 2007, close parentheses, returning to the text. This record of success notwithstanding, there are some concerns with the Orphan Drug Act. One has to do with the exclusivity period. That 7-year period, for example, encourages initial development, but discourages development of competing but chemically different drugs. Congress found this to be undesirable, so in 1993 they passed amendments to the act that allowed patenting of second and third orphan drugs directed at the same disease or condition as the original orphan drug, so long as those second and third drug were clinically superior in defined ways. There also have been some additional concerns with the status of orphan drugs. Suppose, for example, that the patient population turns out to expand beyond the 200,000 threshold, or that the orphan drug turns out to be effective in treating other non-orphan conditions or diseases, or that the orphan drug turns out to be extremely profitable. Should the orphan status be revoked in these instances? Congress has addressed these issues, but has not yet reached agreement on what to do about them.